thank you. This is the final session. Then we'll have one more video before we go on tours. This panel today, we're going to talk about the 2023 Farm Bill. And a lot of people ask, how does that tie to China? Well, it definitely ties to China because of what needs to be talked about in trade, what needs to talk about in our policy here in the U.S. because it affects food production and agriculture. So I have on the panel with me, and I'll allow each of them to introduce themselves, but with me today is Becky Doyle. Becky and I actually traveled to China almost 25 years ago on a trade mission. That's where we met. Yes, in China, Becky and I met. So Becky is going to speak a little bit about her background. I'll be quick here. Abby Fain is also with us today. Abby, it's great to meet you today. Colin Weldkamp is with us as well, and Lee Strom. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'll jump into some questions. Becky, please go ahead.
Starting with oldest first, is that how we're doing it? Seniority?
Beauty first.
Yeah, wisest, I like that, yeah. I'm Becky Doyle. I'm actually an Illinois farmer. I just drove in this morning from across the river. In the 90s, when I met Jim, I was working as the Director of Agriculture for the state of Illinois. I did that for 8 years and got to go to China, I think, either 2 or 3 times during that time period. And the first time was in 1991, so it was a little different in China then than it is now. But and then I worked. I did a little bit of consulting after I left the state government, and then I worked for the UN World Food Program for 4 years, and I traveled to China 2 or 3 times while I was with the UN World Food Program also. So I'm very fond of China, and am pleased to be here today.
Abby Fain. I am a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I work with the Intertribal Agriculture Council as their Director of Policy and Government Relations. And with my organization, we have a technical assistance network across the United States where we work directly with the tribes and tribal producers throughout the country. There are 574 federally recognized tribes, and we have some added layers of complexity in our agriculture operations that are on tribal land specifically. And so we work with producers to navigate USDA programming and the Farm Bill. We are also a co-steward of the Native Farm Bill Coalition, which works to bring parity to tribes and level the playing field for tribes in USDA programs that reach our tribal trust lands and tribal jurisdiction.
Good afternoon. I'm Colin Weldkamp. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. Lots of words and syllables there, MRCTI for short. We're an association of 103 United States mayors along the entire 10-state length of the Mississippi River, from Bemidji, Minnesota to New Orleans, Louisiana. We're headquartered here in St. Louis, and we are led by the mayors of Memphis, Tennessee and Greenville, Mississippi. They are our co-chairs. They're assisted by a 10-mayor executive committee, 1 mayor representing each state along the Mississippi River main stem. For Missouri, you're going to meet him tonight. That is our Missouri State Chairman, Phil Stang, the mayor of Kimmswick, Missouri, which actually is also the smallest city on the Mississippi River, 164 people in his city, but for a little town, they have a big presence. 2 festivals a year bring in 150,000 people into his town, the Strawberry Festival and the Apple Butter Festival. So he goes from 164 people to 150,000 people twice a year. And nobody does it like Kimmswick. They are very good at this. He did logistics and international global trade for 30 years before becoming a mayor, so he got some experience. We have a very close relationship with China, in no small part thank you to the U.S. Heartland China Association. And Min and Governor Holden have embraced our mayors, and so has China. China is the 3rd largest trading partner of the Mississippi River. Canada's number 1, Mexico's number 2. In fact, we have quite a bit of farmers who 100% of their crop every year is sold to China. They have no other clients. Generations of farmers have built those markets overseas. It is a extremely growing and lucrative relationship between our two countries. The Mississippi River Basin is the largest food-producing river basin on Earth. 40% of the world's food supply comes out of our basin. 1 in 12 people on our planet consume products made in the Mississippi River Basin. So it is absolutely essential to the food web of the planet and to our relationship with China. So very happy to be here.
Good afternoon, and Governor Holden, thank you very much again for the invitation to be part of this group and be a panelist with these distinguished panelists as well. And Min, thank you again as well. My name is Lee Strum. Home is a farm in northeastern Illinois, just outside the Chicago suburban fringe area, about as close as you can get to the city and still have agriculture. It's a diversified farm yet where we raise corn and soybeans, but we've raised everything from organic alfalfa to sweet corn to peas for the canning industry. We have 2 greenhouses on the farm now. My son manages for vegetables that go into the restaurant market in Chicago. So very diversified production history. But I spent most of my career also, the off-farm portion, in various leadership roles with the farm credit system here in the U.S., and it ultimately led me to the role of being their regulator in Washington, D.C. I was the former CEO and chairman of the board of the Farm Credit Administration. You may have noticed CoBank was listed up on a slide earlier. CoBank is the largest institution in the farm credit system. So my job while I was 9 years in Washington, D.C., it was a term appointment, was to oversee that today roughly $400 billion portfolio of financial services and credit to the agricultural sector. When it gets to farm bill discussions, I will admit I am not the expert in the room when it gets to all of the nitty-gritty detail of the farm bill because there's a lot there. I spent 40 years focusing on the credit title pieces of the farm bill. But when you really think about how the farm bill impacts agriculture, it really hits the farmer. It really is how does the economic well-being of the farmer and what provisions of the farm bill impact that. So I hope and I'm certain with these panelists, we're going to have a robust discussion here today.
Great. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, everyone. When Min told me, here's the panel you're going to have to work with, I said, what's this guy that's doing the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative? Why is he on the panel? But as I had lunch with him today, I went, wow, the impact and the importance of what he talks about and how it impacts cities. So Colin, love to have you. Maybe you touched upon it in your opening, but would you expand upon the impact of the Farm Bill and why it's so important to those Mississippi cities and towns that you represent?
Sure. So thank you. You don't typically equate Farm Bill with big cities. Why would they care? And in actuality, for our cohort of cities, the vast majority of my cities on the Mississippi River have a population between 2,000 and 10,000 people per city. I have 7 cities with a population above 100,000. And Minneapolis, St. Paul, Davenport, St. Louis, Memphis, Baton Rouge, New Orleans. Everyone else is somewhere in between. The Farm Bill is probably the most consequential legislative vehicle in the federal portfolio today for both rural America and urban America. It now has the longest time horizon of the long-term bills. Most of the other big vehicles have been in shorter and shorter time horizons, so it's a 5-year bill still. It's one of the largest investments, and it also is one of those vehicles that touches on just about every facet of our lives, from water and land management to natural resource management, conservation, and probably the biggest consequence is the global commodity supply chain. It has the biggest impact there. And if you look at the Mississippi River corridor and the basin, the 31-state basin, the Farm Bill regulates manufacturing, agriculture, and everything in between. And those are the two largest economies on the Mississippi. Most of the $400 billion in manufacturing along the Mississippi River is in food and beverage manufacturing. Who here likes beer? I like beer. Okay, if you didn't like beer, it's okay, I can still get you. Who likes wine? All right, and if you don't like wine or beer, I'll still get you. Who likes whiskey? Okay, all of this stuff is made with river water. It's either the Tennessee, the Mississippi, or the Missouri, or the Ohio rivers making the majority of all of those beverages in the United States. Wine, beer, and if you're just total non-alcoholic and you like soda, soda too, Pepsi and Coke products, and then finally, if you like coffee. So if you're going to a Starbucks in any one of our towns, in 50 cities along the Mississippi River, that Starbucks was made with Mississippi River water. 20 million people, including me and my whole family, every day are drinking Mississippi River water through 50 cities. So it is absolutely an essential resource. Oh, it's actually one of the best sources of water on earth. It really is. It is one of the most secure sources of water, and it is one of the cleanest on the planet, believe it or not. And we want to keep it that way, and we want to keep this economy thriving. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Where this Farm Bill, 2023 reauthorization's junction point is the conservation title. This is where our mayors see the most opportunity for this legislation. Title II. We see this as we can ramp up Title II conservation for disaster resilience and climate mitigation capacity using conservation practices at scale to pull that off. The Farm Bill has not been used in this way before. We have been getting to this point, but we believe that if we scale up existing Farm Bill programs like CRP, CSP, and EQIP, the big major pots of money, to include basin-scale projects where we use large-scale conservation efforts to rebuild wetlands, reconnect backwater, reconnect floodplain, and deploy marshes and forests, we can mitigate for our climate impacts at a scale never before achieved. And in fact, we even have a pipeline of projects to do it. The Ducks Unlimited and the mayors along the Mississippi River are deploying 66,000 new acres of conservation land for disaster resilience and adaptation and climate mitigation. This is the largest natural infrastructure deployment project in the United States that's non-federal at this time. The Farm Bill can help us with that.
Kind of in a similar way, Abby, and with what you do with the tribal councils, the practices of on tribal lands over history have been phenomenal, and particularly in some of the regenerative things we discussed. Touch upon that and what you'd like to see in the Farm Bill relative to sustainability and regenerative practices, if you would.
Sure. So for our tribes, we would love to, as I mentioned, like to see a more level playing field for tribes within USDA programming. Oftentimes, their jurisdictional boundaries don't fit neatly within USDA programming, especially in the realms of conservation and within the realms of traditional ecological knowledge. One of the examples I shared, for instance, was a previous client I had worked for, that they had elders collecting some of their traditional, or harvesting some of their traditional plants that happened to be across their boundary lines in a national park. And these elders were arrested by Park Service police for collecting plants that they had for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Later on, they did enter into a memorandum of understanding to issue permits for these practices, but USDA did a study on the appropriate way to harvest these plants. And out of the several methods that they tested, the correct way to get the best chances at regenerating that plant was the way this tribe had always been doing it. And so it took some time for the accepted science to catch up to the tribal practices. And so there are items like that. Also, controlled burns within forest management are another range of practices that tribes have long been doing and have proven to have healthier forests when they have that authority to manage those practices in coordination with the federal government. And so we would like to see opportunities for more management and more administration of programs on the lands that are specific to tribal producers. And these are practices that aren't just beneficial to tribal members. Most of our communities are in the most remote parts of the country, and they are rural communities. At the end of the day, they have rural neighbors, some who are tribal, some who are not tribal, and there are ample opportunities for mutually beneficial relationships between the non-tribal and tribal agriculture operations where we can make sure that the Farm Bill is supportive of those types of practices.
Great, thank you. Becky, I'm going to turn to you and actually ask each of you on this next one. You know, there's always, during the Farm Bill discussions, the program called SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Funding Program. And there's always a trial balloon floated that let's decouple that from the Farm Bill. So Becky, I'll ask you, should we decouple SNAP, which represents 75 to 80% of the Farm Bill spending, from the actual farm activities that are in part of the Farm Bill, or do we keep them together? Give me your perspective on that.
Well, before I get into this, I have to tell you, I've been on Farm Bill panels. I've listened to a gazillion Farm Bill panels over all the years that I've been in agriculture. These two people have just made this the best panel I've ever had.
Well, amen.
Very, very insightful. I was just sitting here listening to Colin going, wow, I didn't know all that, and I'm from Illinois. So I grew up 10 miles from the Mississippi, and I have a whole new view of it now. So back to what you asked me about. I warned you, I get off on tangents. The SNAP program, we were talking about this earlier. I believe the food nutrition programs were brought in or combined with the Farm Bill in about the 85, I think, was what we were talking. And there was a reason for it at the time, and that reason remains, that you can't get the nutrition program passed without the farm part of it, and you can't get the farm part passed without the nutrition side. So I think that holds today. It's essentially an accepted given, and so even though there may be people grumbling out in the Heartland or the Hinterland about why do we have to have them combined, folks within the Beltway know that there's a very good reason, and it's going to stay that way. I kind of take a different view from the grumblers in the Heartland, and I feel like I'm a farmer. I grew up, I'm surrounded by farmers every day. I understand why they get frustrated with food assistance programs, but every person who's on that food assistant who's picking up that SNAP card and using it to feed their family or themselves or an elderly relative is a consumer. And if I'm a farmer, if I don't have consumers, I'm out of business. So I don't think we should judge our consumers. I don't think, we can't afford to. That consumers are consumers, and if they need to be a part of this program, let's leave it the way it is and make do the best with some people will say, well, the nutrition program is 75 to 80% of the farm cake. Well, frankly, the farm cake wouldn't be that big if it wasn't for the nutrition program. So we're siblings. We just need to accept each other and move forward.
Abby, how about you? Any thoughts on the question about decoupling for SNAP?
Yeah, I don't see that happening because, to what Becky said, it's just one doesn't exist without the other in this current political climate, and both any side of the aisle is represented in both of those interests. So I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Good. And Colin, you had some good comments at lunch. Please explain.
Yeah, the dirty secret is that the SNAP program helps rural America just as much, if not more, than urban America. So you're not going to see Republicans get behind moving those to. Some will get behind talking points to appease something, but in reality, most of the Republican caucus is not going to get behind that because they know SNAP offers help to rural America. And in urban America, it's mostly going to schools that are USDA feeding sites. They are in the best position to use SNAP dollars most efficiently and most readily. And finally, SNAP just isn't going to poor folk. SNAP is going to handicapped folk. It's going to the elderly. It's going into people that aren't just in poor areas surrounded by wealthy grocery stores. It's going to people that aren't poor that have no grocery stores, but they also have no mobility. They are in the broadening food desert of the country. And that is especially prevalent in the Mississippi River Delta region, where we are surrounded by the most intense food production on the planet. But ironically, those people can eat. They are miles and miles away from grocery stores, and they don't have the mobility to get to them regularly, along with everything else, and shepherd their families around. SNAP is that lifeline that keeps some of these local economies going. Also, another thing that SNAP helps is local farmers markets, because it gives them a place to supplement their economy as well. And that helps the local economy even more so. So dollar for dollar, bang for your buck, SNAP is where it's at.
We're going to keep fighting to keep SNAP as part of the Farm Bill, it sounds like. I love it. Lee, I'm going to ask you to take a different direction. A few months ago, we passed the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and there were some climate-smart conservation practices put into that bill. Is that going to potentially impact the Farm Bill and maybe take away some funding or maybe cut some programs within what we traditionally think belong in the Farm Bill because of that being put in the IRA funding bill?
Jim, yes, and let me address that in a second. First of all, I was remiss because in my introduction I failed to mention I'm also a partner in Open Prairie, the investment fund that Jim founded. So we have a long connection as well, and I've known Becky for 35, maybe going on 40 years, Becky. So, yeah. So what's interesting when you look at the history of farm bills, the first farm bill in the U.S. was passed in 1933. It was called the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And it was really, it was part of the New Deal of the Franklin Roosevelt administration. And when you look at the precursors or the events that unfolded that caused that to happen, you'd had the lingering effects of World War I through the 1920s. You'd then had the Great Depression. But then you also had, in essence, a climate event. You were in the throes of the Dust Bowl here in the U.S., which was an extended drought period, followed by changing agricultural practices where the dirt was now plowed over in the Great Plains, and windstorms, some of that dirt made its way all the way to the Atlantic Ocean in those windstorms. Here we are 90 years later, and the debate and discussion on the Farm Bill is really taking a focus on climate again. You may have also, I assume most of the people in this room are aware that here in the United States, we're in an interesting economic time period as well, where because of the issues of the last several years and an abundance of federal dollars to get us through this recent crisis, our government now and our banking and our regulatory system is fighting inflation. So there have been several proposals in Congress the last few years, but last year this Inflation Reduction Act was passed. It was roughly $770 billion of federal spending. In that bill was $40 billion directed toward agriculture. For climate-smart agriculture was a term that was used around that frequently. Of that $40 billion, $20 billion of it was earmarked for conservation types of practices to enhance the EQIP program, stewardship conservation, and a couple other conservation programs. Right. 15 billion of that was directed toward rural development, really focusing on rural infrastructure around energy, solar, wind, other types. So some of it for the carbon issues that we're now delighting in agriculture as we figure out ways for agriculture to participate in that. And then the other 5 billion was the water mitigation from the Colorado Basin west. But when you look at that conservation, I mean, that IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that 20 billion was 9 times the amount of conservation money that was in the 2018 Farm Bill. So here you've got a huge focus on the climate. And if I could take the liberty here for a second, what's interesting, you asked the question, is this going to take money away from the Farm Bill? I think the jury is still out in that. And there is other interesting developments. So just last week, a week ago today, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree from Maine entered in the House, entered a bill called the Agricultural Resilience Act. It was entered in the Senate as well, the sponsor being Martin Heinrich, a senator from New Mexico. And if I could just read a couple sentence excerpt on the description on this act. It says, the Agricultural Resilience Act delivers farming's solutions to the climate crisis. Goes on to say the bill would refocus Farm Bill conservation, research, renewable energy, and rural economic development programs on climate resilience and empower farmers and ranchers eager to drive climate change solutions on the ground. Well, so we had IRA last year, money in there. We're in the throes of a Farm Bill. Whether it's going to get passed this year or not, we don't know. But now we've got other pieces of legislation that are attempting to define and refine agriculture's role. It'll be interesting when this bill gets scored to see what type of cost it is. But there's a lot of activity and focus on climate. And I think we are in a new era where farm bills from this point forward are going to have that as a hallmark feature of future legislation.
I'm stunned by it. 9 times as much conservation reserve dollars than what's in a traditional farm bill was in the IRA. That's stunning.
It's money.
Well, it kind of ties to my next topic, which I'm going to leave this for a jump ball, whoever wants to grab it, or who everybody grab it, and that's inflation. And we have seen in this country year over year about 10% increase in prices in real dollars, and some countries have seen 50 to 80% increase in prices. How does Congress address that within the Farm Bill when they're always trying to cut dollars out of Farm Bill monies? And how do we make sure we get the real nominal dollars that we need to continue to support programs within SNAP and other things in the Farm Bill? Who wants to grab that? Anybody?
I think the quick answer is that the discussion will be around, what is it, PC, sorry, it's the price support program. Because, they'll be looking at, because farmers' costs are going up across, not just crop farmers, but livestock farmers and specialty crop, their costs are going up. And so, but the price levels that are set in that program are set at, based on years, past years' information. So they may try to address it by raising those price levels, but that raises the cost, the CBO scoring of the Farm Bill. So it will be a tough question for farm state, especially Republicans who are trying to reduce spending if they're trying to address inflation through these programs. They may say, well, we took, the administration took care of that in the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think one of the other consequences is they may say, well, that was covered, because we got 9 times the amount of money for the conservation programs, we can take the money in the conservation programs in the Farm Bill and move them into commodities programs or other programs. The one thing I liked about the Pingree proposal is that she mentions research, and research always gets it's never darling of the political agenda, and research can solve so many of the issues, whether it's hunger issues, conservation issues. Farmers who are want to do more climate smart agriculture, but they don't have the information they need because there hasn't been enough research done. That's, if I had my one, if I wished upon a penny and threw it in a fountain, it would be that the Farm Bill puts more resources into both land grant, HSBC, and private research that really takes hard looks at and gets the kind of information that our producers need to make these tough decisions and to manage those decisions for years to come.
Jim, I'll just add. I mean, as a producer as well, but in my finance and regulatory background, when I look at this, when you add $40 billion toward agriculture in the Inflation Act, and now you've got another bill out there, the Resilience Act, that was offered last week, not knowing what the cost and score in that. You've got a pool of dollars, and my sense is they're going to lean toward, well, we can reduce some of the Farm Bill spending because of these other bills. But I don't know if any of my other farming friends are still in here. I mean, certainly the crop insurance program for agriculture has been one of the key elements because when you look, I mean, the last 20, 25 years we've had crop insurance. Prior to that, producers were largely at risk to ad hoc type of emergency that Congress would vote on if there was a drought or a disaster or the uncertainty. I hope that they will not tinker with some of those key elements for the ag sector in the bill. But I wonder what they're going to do, again, with this conservation funding that's coming in, being addressed in various bills, how that's going to shake out. I don't have a crystal ball on that.
I was just going to say that in some of the meetings that we've been having on some of the tribal priorities, our focus is elevating the priorities that come at low or no cost. But what we've been hearing is, if there is a cost, where are you recommending we cut from? And so I think that's consistent with what we're hearing from the panel today is if you are going to propose anything additional to what was offered in 2018, also offer where you're recommending the cuts come from to make up for it.
And I would say in commenting on the IRA and its impact across the landscape, it's going to have it, but I think what's important with the IRA is how are the funds deployed? And through what mechanisms will they be deployed? From what we're hearing, most of the conservation money that's in the IRA will be deployed through the states. This will be a largely state game. It will not be something that cities can get into, which is unfortunate. In fact, our mayor sat down with John Podesta in the White House last month and said, you can have individual local government units, counties, cities, states, all apply, send in lots of applications for IRA stuff. Or you can gear the IRA toward funding pipelines of projects, which is what we have along the Mississippi River. We have pipelines of projects that have co-benefits. These are benefits that are to drinking water, to manufacturing, to outdoor recreation and tourism, to high tech, and most importantly, to disaster mitigation. That can onboard for you a lot more benefits and that helps our farmers too, because it provides them with water security. It provides them for the environmental services to better run their farms and produce more products sustainably. And there's another component here that I think the Farm Bill can definitely lean into, that it's too late for the IRA. The IRA is money. It isn't policy. The Farm Bill is policy. So there are significant policy gaps in the Jobs Act and the IRA. They are money bills. They're not policy bills. Where we have to pick up the policy gaps are in these other larger authorization vehicles like Water Resource Development Act, which had good policy in it last year, and now the Farm Bill. For instance, we have no national drought policy. We deal with drought in the United States on an ad hoc basis, and it is one of the most expensive natural disasters out there. The most expensive flood in U.S. history along the Mississippi River occurred in 2019. It was $6.2 billion. The drought of 2012 was $30 billion. The drought last fall, $20 billion. We had barges with $50 million worth of grain in them sitting in the mud in Helena, Arkansas, with no water to float them out. They sat there until they rotted, because we don't have anywhere to put them on farms. Farms have no storage capacity. And yet, we have nothing we can do about drought. We had farmers come to us and say, hey, MRCTI, we will voluntarily cycle acreage out of irrigation that we are watering from the Mississippi River to help you with the drought. Is that valuable to you? We say, well, yeah, please do, great. Okay, well, you got to pay us. You got to pay me for the acreage that I'm bringing out of irrigation. And we had no mechanism within USDA or the Farm Credit Program to compensate a farmer for drought. Drought was not an eligible cost within the last Farm Bill, unfortunately. This Farm Bill, we can make drought an eligible cost for farmers to get assistance for, to help cities and critical national infrastructure. So I think that's sort of the turn, is the money bills are out there. The money is going to flow to the street. The way it flows is going to be important, but there's no policy in those bills. The policy is right before us with bills like the Farm Bill and the next highway bill, which is coming up next. So I think that's where our components will be.
Colin, you bring up a good point, and I want to talk about Helena, because Lee and I were in Helena about a year ago and visiting one of our farmer friends, and I'm going to shift a little bit to a different topic, and this gets into third rail politics, but migrant workforce and immigration. And it's such a partisan discussion in D.C., and it shouldn't be, because today there are about 3 million migrant workers working on farms here in the U.S. We were in Helena, and the farmer we were visiting had 5 South Africans on H-2B1 visas, and I visited 2 other farms subsequently that similarly had South African farmers helping them on their row crop farms. How do we incorporate workforce and migrant workforce with roughly 2.8 million legal crossings last year, and up to maybe 6 million undocumented crossings? How do we incorporate that into a farm bill as well, or how do we use workforce as part of a solution here instead of making it a third rail issue? You can pass to Becky if you'd like.
I might defer. I will say that's not an issue that our cities get involved in very much, but the immigrant workforce is a significant component of the workforce for all of our cities. And I have a bit of a different side of this, because my wife works for the United States Border Patrol. So she runs the Border Patrol Relocation Program. It's a $70 million program. She relocates every single Border Patrol agent in the United States. So, and both my brothers-in-laws are agents. My sister-in-law handles their PR. I get a lot from the Border Patrol family, right? Yeah, my whole family is U.S. Border Patrol. So I get a little bit of an inside scoop on the challenges of no comprehensive immigration reform in this country in decades, and where that has left us. This really comes back to the discussion around policy gaps in the way that the country is run and managed. And we tend to throw money at policy gaps instead of doing the hard work to actually come around and spend the political capital of teasing out the policy that's needed. Where we're feeling it right now, most is sort of in these things. AI, and the intervening nature of social media. And the last Telecommunications Act to pass in the United States was in the 1980s. We don't have comprehensive telecommunication reform to deal with all the new technology that's out there or those things. The same with immigration. So these are all things coming to roost, and we can't continue to just throw money at them and hope that they will pan themselves out from the local level up. I think we're seeing that that's not working. These large, comprehensive vehicles have value that we have to get around, and immigration is one of them. My mayors have told us that they have yet to talk to a governor that isn't reliant on immigrant labor. Not one. Not one governor who's not relying on it, one way or the other, especially in the agricultural sector. The point is, folks have to be treated with dignity, and they have to be treated humanely. They have to be given equity, inclusion, and access. And there has to be ways that, intake ways where folks are not taken advantage of and given no resources if they are contributing to the economy of the country. But again, with half my family in Border Patrol, I know that is not an easy fix. And there is no silver bullet. These are significantly complex problems across the board that multiple administrations from both political parties have contributed to. Whoever you are in the spectrum, everyone has contributed to this problem in one way or the other. And at some point, we have to come around the table to comprehensive reform, or it's going to continue to fall apart.
Jim, I was going to say that. Is this back? Okay. I was going to say, this immigrant labor issue, the farm labor in the U.S., whether it's working fields in California, in the Central Valley or Florida, or if it's working in the meat processing industry, which is heavily migrant workers as well. This is a significant challenge for agriculture. And I know as partners in Open Prairie, the comment earlier was brought up about robotics in agriculture. That's driving this issue in interest in robotics, whether it's robots to harvest tomatoes or strawberries or lettuce from fields. But it also is in our general workforce in and around the ag space as well. My youngest son is the managing director of a project here in Illinois called the Illinois Agri-Food Alliance. It's been around for about 7-8 years. The number one issue that they are focused on and working on right now is workforce development in the state of Illinois. You go to a company like John Deere. We visited them a couple years ago. They said, we can hire PhD computer programmers all day long. We can't hire qualified welders to run our welding equipment in our manufacturing plants. And so this is an issue that stems from many facets, but it's one of the industry in agriculture's biggest challenges right now.
Yeah, thank you. Abby, yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, this as a livestock producer, this is my second number two. This is my number two issue behind research, but it's not part of the Farm Bill, so I know I'm taking us off. But what we need is immigration reform, because we have the U.S. population is no longer growing. We reached even this year, and we're probably going to decline. And before 2016, we hired a lot of people who, as far as we knew, they were legal, but we knew they weren't. That's we only hired 12 people on our farm. We're not a big farm, but we would advertise. We'd talk to everybody in the community. We could not find people to hire locally, so we would end up taking people who drove in the driveway and showed us their cards. They were legal. And we hired them, and they were very good workers. And we were grateful to have them because otherwise the hogs didn't get fed and they didn't get water. And so 2016, they all disappeared. And we were in a real crunch. So we started hiring international interns, South Africans. We call them interns. It's a J1 visa. And they're with us for a year. So you can imagine, you train them for about the first 6 months they're there. They work real well for about 6 months, and then they have to go home. So then you start all over again. And about half of our workforce are J1 visas. And we're glad to have them because we can't hire. The labor force we get locally, we can hire them. They work 2 days. They disappear. They just don't want to come back. And so this happens on hog farms. It happens on dairies. We heard during COVID, because nobody could come from South Africa or Jamaica or wherever to work for us, we had about half of our workforce was high school kids and one college kid because they couldn't go to school. They were doing school online. And so they would do their courses in the morning, get done real fast, and come and work for us until late that evening. And we were grateful to have them. But this is a perennial problem because we don't need migrant workers who come and work for 2 months picking blueberries and then go home to Mexico or Guatemala or wherever. We need people full time. And we just can't hire it from the domestic labor force at this time. And so immigration reform it's no longer just production agriculture. It's gotten into retail agriculture and manufacturing and the packing plants. There's a packing plant in northwestern Iowa that has taken a hotel, 3-story motel there in the city where they are, and turned it into migrant labor housing. And they bring people in by the airplane load, to work in their packing plant. And I don't know how long they're there, but and I hope it's legal since I just said it to everybody in this room.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Becky and Abby.
Yeah, I really don't care about the Farm Bill. I want to fix immigration reform.
That was pretty obvious. Well, Becky, Abby, Colin, Lee, thank you for your time. I'm getting the hook that we need to wrap up.
We're done.
It went by
gosh.
fast, I know. Thank you for joining me, and we'll look forward to seeing you over dinner as well. Thank you.